Rain drummed softly against black umbrellas as the last handfuls of earth fell onto Daniel Harper's coffin. His daughter, Emma, stood alone beside the grave, barely noticing the cold wind biting through her coat. Across the cemetery, her stepmother, Victoria, accepted condolences with perfectly timed tears that vanished the moment no one was looking. Something about her composure felt rehearsed, as though this day had been anticipated long before it arrived. Hours later, the family gathered inside the lawyer's quiet office. The air smelled of polished wood and old paper, while anxious whispers filled every corner. Everyone expected Daniel's estate to be divided fairly. The sprawling farmhouse, fertile acreage, investment accounts, and savings represented generations of hard work. Emma wasn't thinking about wealth. She simply hoped to keep the home where every childhood memory still lived. The lawyer unfolded the will with careful hands. One by one, the valuable assets were assigned to Victoria. The mansion, the farmland, the bank accounts, antique collections, even Daniel's prized trucks and machinery. Each announcement deepened the stunned silence surrounding the room. Finally, the lawyer looked toward Emma. "To my beloved daughter, I leave ownership of the old barn located on the northern edge of the property." A murmur swept through the relatives. Someone sighed with sympathy. Another quietly whispered that the poor girl had been cheated. The weathered barn had been abandoned for years, its roof sagging beneath countless winters, its faded boards barely standing against the wind. Emma forced a small smile, though disappointment settled heavily inside her chest. Across the room, Victoria lowered her eyes to hide the satisfaction curling across her lips. As everyone prepared to leave, the lawyer gently stopped Emma. "Your father added one final instruction," he said, in a voice barely above a whisper. "He insisted that no matter what happens, the barn must never be demolished." Emma frowned, confused by such an unusual request. Behind the office window, dark clouds gathered overhead, and for the first time that day, the forgotten barn no longer seemed worthless. It felt like the beginning of a secret. Long before the funeral, before the will, and before the mystery surrounding the old barn, Emma's world had changed forever the day her mother died. The warm laughter that once filled the farmhouse disappeared almost overnight, leaving behind quiet hallways and empty rooms that never felt like home again. Daniel tried to be both father and mother, but grief settled heavily on his shoulders, making every smile harder to find. When Victoria entered their lives 2 years later, she seemed like an answer to everyone's prayers. She was graceful, attentive, and endlessly kind whenever neighbors or friends were watching. She baked pies for church gatherings, organized charity events, and spoke to Emma with gentle patience that earned admiration from everyone around her. But behind closed doors, another side slowly emerged. It began with little changes that hardly seemed important. Victoria insisted on managing the household finances because Daniel was working too hard. She reorganized family photographs, quietly removing every picture of Emma's mother from the living room. Stories about the family's past gradually changed until it sounded as though Victoria had always belonged there. Whenever Emma tried to mention her mother, Victoria would softly remind her that dwelling on the past prevented healing. The greatest change was Daniel himself. Business trips became longer, family dinners grew quieter, conversations between father and daughter became rushed, often interrupted by Victoria with perfectly reasonable excuses. Emma couldn't understand why the man who had once carried her on his shoulders now seemed so distant. Yet there were moments that didn't fit the picture. Sometimes she found folded notes tucked inside library books her father recommended. On birthdays, anonymous gifts appeared that contained memories only he would know. Once, she caught him standing alone beside the old barn, watching her from across the field with an expression filled with regret before quietly walking away. As the years passed, Emma believed she had been forgotten. Only much later would she realize her father had never stopped watching over her. He had simply been protecting something far greater than she could possibly imagine, waiting for the day she would finally understand why the old barn mattered more than anyone knew. The following morning, Emma walked across the dew-soaked field toward the old barn, its weathered silhouette rising against a pale gray sky. Every step felt heavier than the last. As a child, she had spent countless afternoons there beside her father, but she had not crossed its threshold in nearly 15 years. The warped wooden doors groaned as she pushed them open, releasing the familiar scent of aged timber, engine oil, dried hay, and dust that had settled undisturbed through the seasons. Sunlight slipped through cracks in the roof, casting narrow beams across forgotten shelves and rusted farming equipment. Cobwebs stretched between old rafters like delicate curtains. Her father's workbench still stood exactly where he had left it, scattered with worn chisels, hand planes, and neatly arranged jars filled with nails and screws. Time seemed frozen, as though he had simply stepped outside and never returned. Emma ran her fingers across the bench, leaving clean trails through the thick dust. A rush of memories followed. She could almost hear her father's laughter as he taught her how to sand rough wood until it felt as smooth as glass. She remembered building birdhouses together and proudly hammering crooked nails while he pretended not to notice. Near one support beam, she noticed faded initials carved into the wood. DH and EH inside an old cabinet rested a stack of forgotten family photographs showing happier days before grief had divided them. Her chest tightened as she realized someone had carefully protected these keepsakes from moisture and decay. While lifting a rusted toolbox from beneath the workbench, something metallic rattled inside. Hidden beneath broken wrenches and worn bolts lay an old brass key wrapped in faded cloth. Curious, Emma searched nearby and spotted an unfamiliar symbol carved low into the neighboring support beam, almost invisible beneath years of dirt. She traced the strange marking with trembling fingers. It didn't look accidental. It looked like a message deliberately left behind by someone who expected only one person would ever find it. Emma returned the next morning with cleaning supplies, determined to make sense of the strange symbol and the brass key. Dust swirled through the cool air as she swept decades of dirt from the weathered floor. The more she cleaned, the more the barn revealed details that refused to make sense. Most of the wooden planks were faded and cracked with age, yet a handful were secured with bright steel nails that looked surprisingly new. They stood out against the rusted hardware surrounding them, as though someone had repaired only one small section for a very specific reason. Curious, Emma knelt to examine the floor more closely. Several support beams appeared slightly out of alignment, unlike the rest of the carefully crafted structure her father had built. When she stepped across one corner of the barn, the floor answered with a deep, hollow thud instead of solid wood. She repeated the step twice more. The same strange echo answered beneath her feet, sending a chill through her body. Before she could investigate further, an old pickup truck rolled slowly into the driveway. It belonged to Mr. Jenkins, the elderly neighbor whose family had farmed the next property for generations. After listening quietly to Emma's discoveries, he stared toward the barn with thoughtful eyes. "I used to see your father here long after midnight," he said softly. "Those last few months before he passed, he'd work alone with lantern light glowing through the cracks. Never told me what he was doing, just smiled and said he was making sure the future stayed where it belonged." His words lingered long after he drove away. As evening settled across the fields, Emma locked the barn and turned toward the farmhouse. Halfway across the pasture, she felt the unmistakable sensation that someone was watching her. Near the distant tree line, A dark figure stood perfectly still for a brief moment before disappearing behind the shadows, leaving only unanswered questions behind. The phone rang before Emma had even finished her morning coffee. Victoria's voice floated through the receiver, warm and sympathetic in a way that immediately put her on guard. She spoke about fresh starts, painful memories, and how keeping the old barn would only prolong Emma's grief. Then she offered to buy it. The amount was modest, almost insulting, considering the rest of the estate she had inherited. Emma politely declined, surprised that Victoria would suddenly care about a structure she had dismissed for years. 2 days later, the offer doubled. This time, Victoria's kindness sounded forced, her patience thinner. She insisted the barn was becoming a burden and reminded Emma that repairs would cost more than the building was worth. When Emma refused again, the call ended without the usual polite farewell. The following afternoon, a black luxury SUV pulled into the driveway. A sharply dressed representative introduced himself as a developer interested in purchasing only the small parcel containing the barn. He named a price so high that Emma wondered if she had misheard him. No sensible investor would pay that much for a collapsing wooden building surrounded by neglected pasture. When she asked why the property was suddenly so valuable, the man simply smiled and claimed it fit into a future expansion project. His answer felt rehearsed, lacking even the smallest trace of sincerity. That evening, Emma found an unmarked envelope wedged beneath her front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper carrying only one sentence. "Leave the barn alone while you still can." No signature, no explanation. She read the message twice before folding it carefully into her pocket. Instead of frightening her away, it confirmed what her instincts had been whispering ever since she stepped inside the forgotten building. Someone knew exactly what the barn concealed, and whoever they were had become desperate enough to spend a fortune or issue quiet threats to make sure she never discovered the truth buried beneath its agging floor. Emma refused to let fear drive her away. Instead, she returned to the barn with the brass key tucked safely into her jacket pocket and the anonymous warning folded beside it. If someone wanted her gone this badly, then her father had been protecting something far more important than an old building. She began searching every shelf, cabinet, and drawer with fresh determination, examining items she had overlooked only days before. Inside a weathered woodworking manual, she found a handwritten note squeezed between brittle pages. In her father's unmistakable handwriting were only a few words. "The strongest foundations hide beneath the weakest boards." There was no date, no explanation, only a tiny version of the same carved symbol she had discovered on the support beam. Her pulse quickened. She searched the remaining books and uncovered more notes tucked inside forgotten manuals. None revealed the full truth, yet each pointed her toward another part of the barn. Small symbols carved into support posts matched markings sketched in the margins of her father's notebooks. Together, they formed a path, almost like stepping stones leading through the building. The barn was no ordinary workshop. It had become an enormous puzzle, designed by a man who expected only one person would have the patience and the reason to solve it. With every clue, Emma became increasingly convinced that her father had anticipated betrayal. He hadn't simply hidden something. He had built layers of protection, ensuring the truth could survive even if he never lived to tell it himself. That night, unable to sleep, Emma glanced through her bedroom window toward the distant barn. Moonlight stretched across the empty field, making every shadow seem alive. Then she noticed movement. Flashlights flickered between the weathered walls before quickly disappearing. Two dark figures slipped around the back of the building, speaking in hushed voices she couldn't hear. By the time Emma grabbed a flashlight and reached the barn, the strangers were gone. Only fresh boot prints remained in the damp soil, leading away from the building and vanishing into the darkness beyond the tree line, proving she was no longer searching alone. The boot prints haunted Emma through the night, but by sunrise, her fear had hardened into resolve. Carrying her father's old pry bar, she returned to the section of floor marked by the carved symbol and the strange echo beneath her feet. The bright nails she had noticed earlier came loose far more easily than they should have, almost as if they had been placed there with the expectation that someone would eventually remove them. One by one, the reinforced boards lifted away. Beneath them, a narrow wooden ladder disappeared into darkness. Emma switched on her flashlight and slowly climbed down. The air below was cool and dry, carrying the faint scent of cedar instead of damp earth. Hidden beneath the barn was a carefully constructed chamber, untouched by time. Shelves lined the walls, holding sealed trunks wrapped in waxed canvas. Neatly stacked boxes contained old family photographs, yellowed maps of the property, original land surveys, and leather-bound journals labeled in her father's handwriting. Her breath caught. This wasn't a hiding place created in panic. It had been planned with extraordinary care. Near the back wall rested a heavy metal box secured by an iron lock. The brass key in her pocket seemed almost certain to fit. Around it lay bundles of legal documents tied with faded ribbon, including family deeds and financial records dating back decades. Every discovery pointed toward the same unsettling conclusion. Her father hadn't merely suspected wrongdoing. He had spent years gathering evidence, preserving every piece where no one would think to look. As Emma reached toward the locked box, a violent crash exploded above her. The barn doors slammed open. Heavy footsteps pounded across the wooden floor, followed by the unmistakable sound of furniture being shoved aside. Someone was inside. She froze, extinguishing her flashlight as dust drifted from the ceiling with every footstep overhead. Voices whispered urgently, then silence settled for one terrifying moment. The first floorboard above the hidden chamber creaked. Whoever had entered the barn wasn't searching randomly. They knew exactly where to look. Emma remained perfectly still until the footsteps above drifted toward the opposite end of the barn. After several agonizing minutes, a car engine roared to life outside and silence returned. Only then did she switch on her flashlight again. With trembling hands, she slipped the brass key into the iron lock. It turned smoothly, as though it had been waiting years for this single moment. Inside the metal box rested a bundle of journals, carefully wrapped in oilcloth, along with a sealed envelope bearing her name. She opened the first journal and immediately recognized her father's steady handwriting. Page after page revealed a painful truth. Victoria had quietly taken control of every financial decision after marrying Daniel. She convinced him to sign documents while he recovered from surgeries, claiming they were routine business papers. As his health declined, she isolated him from trusted advisors, redirected family investments, and transferred valuable assets into accounts hidden behind complicated legal structures. Daniel documented every suspicious transaction, every conversation, and every attempt he made to stop her. But without complete proof, any accusation would have been dismissed as the confusion of a dying man. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she continued reading. "I know what she's doing," one entry read. "If I confront her too soon, she'll destroy everything before the truth can survive." Another journal explained why he had seemed distant. Victoria monitored his phone calls, controlled visitors, and watched nearly every conversation he shared with Emma. To protect both his daughter and the evidence, he had pretended to surrender, quietly building a record strong enough to outlive him. The final letter shook Emma to her core. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then you found the only place I knew she would never value. I didn't leave you the barn because it was all I had. I left it because it holds everything they tried to steal from you. The inheritance had never been unfair. It had been his final act of love. Above her, the old barn stood weathered and forgotten, hiding the truth beneath ordinary floorboards until the one person Daniel trusted was finally ready to uncover it. Emma barely slept after reading her father's journals. By dawn, she had packed the most important documents into waterproof storage cases, leaving only carefully organized copies inside the hidden chamber. Every instinct warned her that time was running out. If Victoria suspected the evidence had been found, she would stop at nothing to erase it forever. The first attack came through the mail. A certified legal notice claimed Emma's ownership of the barn was being challenged due to an alleged error in the will. The filing demanded immediate access to the property while the dispute was reviewed. Hours later, the distant rumble of engines echoed across the fields. 2 bulldozers and a surveying truck parked along the edge of the pasture, their operators insisting they had been hired to inspect the land for future development. Emma refused to let them cross the fence. She called the family lawyer, who arrived carrying copies of the will and firmly ordered the crews to leave. Before departing, he quietly admitted he had never believed Daniel's unusual instructions about preserving the barn. Now, after hearing Emma's discoveries, he understood why those words had mattered so much. That evening, Mr. Jenkins drove over with security lights, heavy chains, and his old hunting dog. Together, they reinforced every entrance while discussing the safest way to preserve the evidence. The elderly farmer confessed he had promised Daniel years ago that if anything ever happened, he would watch over the barn until Emma returned. Just after midnight, headlights swept across the property. 3 men climbed from an unmarked truck, wearing reflective vests and carrying forged inspection badges. They demanded entry, claiming they had emergency authorization to assess structural hazards before demolition. Emma stood firmly in the doorway, refusing to move. As the strangers argued, distant police sirens shattered the silence. The men exchanged nervous glances before rushing back into their truck and disappearing into the darkness. Watching their taillights vanish, Emma realized the battle was no longer about inheritance. It had become a desperate race to keep the truth alive long enough for justice to catch up. The morning after the attempted break-in, Emma, the family lawyer, and Mr. Jenkins gathered inside the hidden chamber. With every entrance secured above them, they spread the recovered journals across a sturdy wooden table. There was only one item left unopened, the thick envelope sealed with red wax beneath the stack of records. Her father's careful handwriting covered the front. For my attorney, if Emma has found the truth. The lawyer carefully broke the seal and unfolded several notarized documents. His expression changed almost immediately. Beneath the letter rested Daniel's original will, signed years before the version presented after his death. Unlike the later document, this one divided the estate equally, ensuring Emma would inherit the farmhouse, farmland, and family investments. Attached to it were signed statements from Daniel explaining why he believed later revisions had been obtained through manipulation, while he was heavily medicated during his illness. The discoveries continued. Original property deeds showed valuable parcels secretly transferred through shell companies controlled by Victoria. Financial ledgers traced missing funds into hidden accounts. Audio recordings stored on labeled memory cards captured private conversations in which Victoria pressured Daniel to sign documents he barely had the strength to read. One signed confession from a former financial advisor, admitted he had altered paperwork after accepting large payments to remain silent. Every piece fit perfectly with the journals. Years of deception, carefully hidden beneath legal language and forged signatures, unfolded into an undeniable pattern of fraud. Finally, Emma unfolded the last letter addressed only to her. "My sweetest Emma, if this reaches your hands, then you succeeded where I could not. I wanted to protect you, but I also wanted you to inherit something greater than land. I wanted you to inherit the truth. Wealth can be stolen, homes can be taken, but truth, once uncovered, belongs to no one except those brave enough to carry it into the light." Tears blurred her vision as silence filled the chamber. The barn had never concealed buried gold or forgotten treasure. It had protected something infinitely more valuable. Her father's voice, his honesty, and the undeniable proof that an entire family legacy had been stolen through calculated betrayal, waiting patiently beneath ordinary floorboards until justice finally had its chance. The evidence hidden beneath the barn changed everything. Within days, the family lawyer presented the journals, recordings, financial records, and original legal documents to investigators. What had once appeared to be a settled inheritance quickly became the center of a sweeping fraud inquiry. Experts verified Daniel's handwriting, authenticated the audio recordings, and confirmed that multiple property transfers had been executed under suspicious circumstances while he was gravely ill. Victoria's carefully constructed story began to unravel. In the courtroom, the confidence she had worn for years slowly disappeared as witness after witness confirmed the deception. The former financial advisor repeated the confession he had signed, admitting he had accepted money to alter documents and conceal the movement of family assets. Bank officials traced hidden accounts, while handwriting specialists demonstrated how signatures had been manipulated on critical paperwork. Every new revelation strengthened the case that Daniel had been betrayed by the person he trusted most. Emma sat quietly through the proceedings, clutching her father's final letter. For the first time since his funeral, she no longer questioned why he had seemed distant during his final years. His silence had never been surrender, it had been sacrifice. The judge declared the fraudulent transfers invalid and restored ownership of the estate according to Daniel's original intentions. The farmhouse, fertile fields, investments, and family heirlooms were returned to Emma, while criminal charges followed the financial crimes uncovered by the investigation. Yet the greatest victory could not be measured in acres or bank accounts. Before the hearing ended, the judge acknowledged Daniel's extraordinary efforts to preserve the truth despite overwhelming circumstances. His journals, careful records, and unwavering determination had protected his daughter's future long after his own life had ended. As Emma stepped outside the courthouse, reporters called her name, but she never looked toward the cameras. Instead, she lifted her eyes toward the distant countryside, where an old weathered barn still stood. At last, her father's name had been cleared. His final promise had been fulfilled. And justice, though painfully delayed, had finally found its way home. Months passed, and the old barn no longer stood as a forgotten relic abandoned to time. Fresh cedar boards replaced the weathered walls where needed, while every original beam that could be saved remained exactly where Daniel had left it. Sunlight now streamed through spotless windows, filling the restored workshop with warmth instead of dust. Children from nearby farms gathered there on weekends to learn woodworking. Neighbors shared family histories, and visitors came to hear the remarkable story of the place everyone had once believed was worthless. Emma insisted that one part of the barn remain untouched. Hidden beneath the carefully restored floor, the underground chamber stayed exactly as her father had designed it. The journals, photographs, and legal records were preserved in secure archival cases, serving as a quiet reminder that truth often survives because someone has the courage to protect it until the right moment arrives. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Emma stood alone beside her father's old workbench. She gently ran her hand across its smooth surface, smiling as memories replaced the pain that had once lived there. For years, she had believed her father had abandoned her when she needed him most. Now she understood. Every difficult choice he made had been guided by one purpose: ensuring that she would one day discover the truth for herself, free from manipulation and fear. She stepped outside and looked across the fields stretching beyond the barn, their golden colors glowing beneath the setting sun. The land had been restored, the family name had been honored, and justice had finally reached a place where betrayal once ruled. Emma realized the greatest inheritance her father had left behind had never been measured in money, property, or possessions. It was faith. Faith that truth could outlast deception. Faith that love could survive silence. And faith that even the heaviest burdens sometimes conceal life's greatest blessings. Because what appears worthless today may become tomorrow's greatest treasure, and the truths buried deepest beneath our feet always find their way into the light for those willing to keep searching.